There's a library buried beneath the sand. Not metaphorically, literally. Thousands of clay tablets, baked hard by time and fire, pressed with symbols older than the alphabet, older than the pyramids, older than almost every story you've been told about where we came from. These tablets were found in the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia, in the dry earth between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, in what we now call Iraq. And if you read them, really read them, they don't tell the story you learned in school. They tell a different story entirely. A story about beings who came from the sky, beings who walked among humans, who ruled over cities, who built temples and demanded tribute. Beings who, according to these ancient texts, didn't just influence human civilization, they created it. They created us. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki. And here's the strange part, the unsettling part, the part that makes you wonder why this isn't talked about more openly. These tablets, these fragile records of the distant past, describe events that sound impossible. They describe genetic creation. They describe humans being fashioned from clay and divine blood. They describe a great flood sent to wipe out humanity. They describe gods descending from the heavens in vehicles that roared and glowed. They describe advanced knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, law, agriculture, appearing suddenly, fully formed, in a world that should have been primitive. And all of this was written down thousands of years before the Bible, thousands of years before modern science, thousands of years before we had any framework to understand what these words might actually mean. So the question isn't whether these tablets exist. They do. The question isn't whether the Sumerians believed these things. They did. The question, the one that sits in the back of your mind and refuses to leave, is this: what if they weren't writing mythology? What if they were writing history? Pause for a moment. Because once you ask that question, once you allow yourself to really consider it, everything changes. The timeline of human development starts to look different. The sudden appearance of civilization starts to feel less like natural evolution and more like intervention. The ancient obsession with the stars, the monumental architecture, the shared myths across unconnected cultures, all of it starts to form a pattern that suggests we might not know our own origin story as well as we think we do. This isn't about blind belief. This isn't about rejecting science or embracing fantasy. This is about looking at what was actually written, what was actually built, what actually happened in the deep past, and asking honest questions. Questions that make historians uncomfortable. Questions that challenge the neat, linear narrative we've constructed about human progress. Questions like, why did civilization explode into existence so suddenly? Why do cultures separated by oceans describe the same sky gods? Why were our ancestors obsessed with beings who descended from above? And why, if these were just myths, were they recorded with such precision, such detail, such consistency across thousands of years? The Anunnaki are not a modern invention. They're not a fringe theory born from the internet age. They are written into the oldest texts of human civilization, described not as metaphors or symbols, but as physical beings with names, relationships, conflicts, and purposes. Beings who, according to these ancient records, shaped the course of human existence in ways we are only beginning to understand. So let's go back. Let's go back to the clay tablets. Let's go back to the temples and ziggurats. Let's go back to a time when humans looked up at the sky and saw not just stars, but travelers. Let's examine what the Sumerians actually said, what they actually believed, what they actually recorded for future generations to find. And let's be honest about what we discover. Because if the Anunnaki were real, if there is even a fragment of truth in these ancient accounts, then human history as we know it is incomplete. The story of who we are, where we came from, and why we exist might be far stranger, far older, and far more deliberate than we've been taught to believe. The library buried beneath the sand is waiting, and once you open it, you cannot unread what's inside. The word itself carries weight. Anunnaki. Even saying it feels like invoking something ancient, something half-remembered from a dream. In the Sumerian language, it roughly translates to those who came from the heavens to earth, or princely offspring of Anu. Anu being the supreme sky god in the Sumerian pantheon, the ruler of the heavens, the father of the gods. But here's where it gets interesting. The Anunnaki were described as distant, abstract deities. They weren't formless spirits or cosmic forces. They were described as physical beings. They had bodies. They ate and drank. They loved and hated. They fought wars. They made decisions. They walked on earth. The tablets name them individually. Anu, the highest authority, rarely descending from the heavens, but ever present in command. Enlil, his son, the god of wind and storm, often portrayed as strict, even harsh, the enforcer of divine will on her. And Enki, also called Ea, the god of water, wisdom, and creation, described as compassionate toward humans, often intervening on their behalf. These are not vague mythological archetypes. These are characters with personalities, with motivations, with roles to play in a larger narrative. And that narrative, as told in tablet after tablet, centers on one shocking claim: that the Anunnaki came to Earth with a purpose, that they needed something, and that humans were created to provide it. Let that sink in. Not that humans evolved and then began worshipping these beings. Not that primitive people invented gods to explain natural phenomena. But that humans were created deliberately by these beings to serve a function. The tablets are explicit about this. In the Atrahasis epic, one of the oldest creation myths ever recorded, the Anunnaki are described as mining gold from the earth. The work is backbreaking. The lesser gods, the Igigi, rebel against the higher gods, the Anunnaki, refusing to continue the labor. A crisis emerges. The work must continue, but the workers are unwilling. So Enki proposes a solution: create a new worker, a being capable of performing the labor but subservient to the gods. A being made from the clay of the earth, mixed with the blood of a sacrificed god, imbued with just enough intelligence to follow commands but not enough to challenge authority. And so, according to the text, humans were fashioned. Not born from natural evolution over millions of years, not shaped gradually by environmental pressures, but designed, engineered, brought into existence by deliberate genetic manipulation. The text uses the word Lulu, which means mixed or primitive worker. The tablets describe the goddess Minhur-Sag, also called Mintu or Ninmah, the mother goddess, performing this creation. She mixes clay with the essence of a god, places the mixture into molds, and from this, humans emerge. Now, you can read this as pure mythology. You can say it's allegory, symbolic, a pre-scientific attempt to explain human origins. And maybe that's all it is. But consider the language. Consider the specificity. This isn't a poetic description of divine breath animating dust. This is a procedural account. Ingredients are gathered, a process is followed, a result is achieved. It reads, disturbingly, like a formula. And here's the part that sends a chill down your spine. The tablets describe this creation as happening after the Anunnaki had already been on Earth for a long time. The timeline, as reconstructed from various texts, suggests the Anunnaki arrived hundreds of thousands of years before the creation of modern humans. They established cities, they mined resources, they managed operations. Then, at some point, they created us. Why gold? The tablets don't explain this with scientific precision, but they make it clear gold was valuable to the Anunnaki. Some interpretations suggest it was used to shield their atmosphere on their home planet, a world called Nibiru, described as distant, orbiting through the outer solar system. Others suggest gold was needed for technology, for power, for purposes humans couldn't fully comprehend. But the why matters less than the how. Because if the how is real, if there is any factual basis to this narrative, then we are not the product of blind chance and natural selection. We are the product of design, of intention, of someone else's need. Think about that. The Anunnaki are described across multiple tablets, across centuries of Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian texts. They are not a single-source myth. They are woven into the fabric of the earliest recorded civilization, referenced in king lists, in temple hymns, in legal codes, in astronomical charts. They are treated as historical fact by the people who wrote these texts. And those people, the Sumerians, were not primitive. They invented writing. They created the first cities. They developed mathematics, including the base 60 number system we still use today for time and angles. They mapped the heavens with astonishing accuracy. They understood astronomy at a level that shouldn't have been possible without telescopes. So when they write about the Anunnaki, when they describe these beings in detail, recording their genealogies, their conflicts, their interventions in human affairs, are we really supposed to dismiss it all as fantasy? Or is it possible, just possible, that they were recording something they witnessed, something they were told, something that actually happened? The tablets sit in museums now, behind glass, studied by scholars who translate the words but often shy away from the implications, because the implications are too large, too disruptive, too incompatible with the established narrative of gradual human development. But the tablets don't care about our comfort. They say what they say. And what they say is that beings from the sky came to Earth, needed workers, and created humanity to fill that need. That's the story, and it was written in stone long before anyone thought to question it. Let's talk about what shouldn't exist. In 1849, a British archaeologist named Austin Henry Layard was excavating the ruins of Nineveh, the ancient Assyrian capital, in what is now northern Iraq. He was searching for artifacts, for treasures, for proof of the biblical world. What he found instead was a library, not a small collection, an entire archive, thousands upon thousands of clay tablets, stacked and stored in the palace of King Ashurbanipal, a ruler from the 7th century BCE. But here's the crucial detail. Many of these tablets were copies of much older texts. Texts from Sumer, from Akkad, from civilizations that predated Assyria by thousands of years. Ashurbanipal had sent scribes across Mesopotamia to gather and preserve the ancient knowledge, the oldest stories, the foundational myths of the region. And among those texts were the creation epics, the flood narratives, the tales of the Anunnaki. When scholars began translating these tablets in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they were stunned. Because these stories, these Mesopotamian myths, were older than the Bible, significantly older, and they contained the same events. A great flood sent by the gods to destroy humanity. A righteous man warned in advance, instructed to build a massive boat to save his family and pairs of animals. The flood covering the earth. The boat coming to rest on a mountain. The sending of birds to find dry land. The sacrifice offered afterward. The gods regretting their decision. This is the Epic of Gilgamesh, specifically the story of Utnapishtim, the Mesopotamian Noah, and it was written down at least 1,000 years before the earliest biblical texts. But it gets stranger. In the Atrahasis epic, the flood story is even more detailed, and the reason for the flood is explicit. Humanity had become too numerous, too noisy. The gods, particularly Enlil, could not sleep. They were disturbed by the constant sound of human activity. So Enlil decides to wipe out humanity entirely. But Enki, the god who had created humans, warns a man named Atrahasis. He tells him to build a boat, gives him exact dimensions, tells him to seal it with bitumen, to bring aboard his family and representatives of all living creatures. Sound familiar? The flood comes. The waters rise. All of humanity perishes, except for Atrahasis and those on the boat. When the waters recede, Atrahasis makes a sacrifice. The gods, starving because there are no humans left to provide offerings, smell the sacrifice and gather around it like flies. Then comes the critical moment. The gods argue. Enlil is furious that any humans survived. Enki defends his decision, pointing out that destroying all of humanity was excessive, that the problem could have been solved differently. A compromise is reached. Humanity will be allowed to continue, but with new limitations. Infant mortality, barrenness, predators, all introduced to keep the population in check. This is not metaphor. This is not allegory. This is a narrative with cause and effect, with conflict and resolution, with specific engineering solutions to specific problems. And it predates the biblical flood by over 1,000 years. Now, you can argue that the biblical writers borrowed from earlier Mesopotamian sources. That's the standard academic explanation. Cultural diffusion, shared mythology, one story influencing another over time. But here's what that explanation misses. The Mesopotamian versions are more detailed, more specific, more logistically precise. The biblical version reads like a summary. The Mesopotamian versions read like first-hand accounts. The Eridu Genesis, another Sumerian creation text, describes the same over the way which hands supports the books and prayers of the tension. It describes kingship as something lowered from heaven, not invented by humans, but given to them. This phrase appears repeatedly in Sumerian texts. Kingship lowered from heaven, writing lowered from heaven, civilization lowered from heaven. as if these things didn't develop naturally, as if they were taught, transferred, installed. The tablets also describe something called the Me, often translated as divine decrees or divine powers. These were the fundamental elements of civilization: law, music, art, agriculture, metalworking, writing, kingship, priesthood, and according to the myths, the Me were not discovered by humans. They were possessed by the gods, particularly by Enki, and occasionally stolen or transferred to humanity. There's a famous myth where the goddess Inanna tricks Enki into giving her the Me while he's drunk. She takes them to her city, Erech, and establishes civilization there. Enki, when he sobers up, tries to retrieve them, but fails. It's a strange story, almost humorous, but beneath the narrative is an assumption that civilization is not native to humanity, that it had to come from somewhere else. The tablets describe the creation of humans in disturbing detail. In one text, Ninhursag creates 14 humans, 7 male and 7 female, from lumps of clay mixed with the blood and saved in the dark times, prad and prayer, wherever it prays. The process involves placing the mixtures into a mold, waiting a specific period, then bringing forth the humans. The language is clinical: step 1, step 2, step 3, not poetic, not mystical, procedural. And then there's this line from the Atrahasis: let the birth goddess create offspring, and let man bear the load of the gods. Let man bear the load of the gods, not serve the gods. Bear the load, like pack animals, like tools. The tablets describe humans as essentially slave labor, created for a purpose, engineered to specifications. And when the flood is sent, it's not because humans are morally corrupt, as in the biblical version. It's because they're too loud, too numerous, too much of an inconvenience. This is a very different kind of creation story, one where humans are not the pinnacle of divine creation, made in God's image, given dominion over the earth, but rather with a workforce. The underclass, the solution to a labor shortage. And we were nearly exterminated, not because of sin, but because we were annoying. If this is mythology, it's brutal mythology. Mythology that doesn't flatter humanity. Mythology that doesn't give us a central role in the cosmic drama, which raises the question, why would anyone invent this story? Why would the Sumerians, the first great civilization, tell a creation myth that reduces them to accidents, to tools, to beings created out of convenience rather than love? Unless they didn't invent it, unless they were told. The tablets sit in the British Museum, in the Louvre, in universities and private collections around the world. They've been photographed, catalogued, translated. The words are clear, the narratives are consistent. But we treat them as mythology because the alternative is too strange, too incompatible with the world as we understand it. But what if the Sumerians were simply recording what they knew, what they had been taught, what their ancestors witnessed? What then? Here's a fact that doesn't get enough attention. Human beings are genetic anomalies. We share approximately 98.8% of our DNA with chimpanzees, which sounds like we're nearly identical, and in many ways, we are. But that remaining 1.2% represents something extraordinary, something that shouldn't exist, at least not according to the standard evolutionary timeline. Somewhere between 6 and 7 million years ago, the ancestors of humans and chimpanzees, diverged, two species going in different directions. For millions of years, that divergence was slow, gradual, unremarkable. The hominin line produced various species: Australopithecus, Homo habilis, Homo erectus. Tool use developed, brain size increased slightly. Social structures became more complex. All of this tracks with standard evolutionary theory. Small changes accumulating over vast stretches of time, shaped by environmental pressures, by survival advantages, by random mutations that occasionally prove beneficial. But then something happened. Around 200,000 years ago, anatomically modern humans appear, Homo sapiens, and within a remarkably short window, relatively speaking, something changes. Not just anatomically, cognitively. By 50,000 years ago, humans are creating art, symbolic thinking, language, culture, technology. Not simple tools, sophisticated instruments, needles, fishing hooks, throwing spears, watercraft. This is called the Great Leap Forward by some anthropologists, the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. A sudden, dramatic increase in cognitive ability and cultural complexity that has no clear precedent in the fossil record. And here's the problem. Evolution doesn't usually work this way. Evolution is gradual, incremental. You don't get sudden leaps in intelligence. You don't get dramatic increases in brain function without clear environmental triggers or transitional forms. But with Homo sapiens, you do. Our brains are 3 times larger than those of chimpanzees, despite relatively minor genetic differences. Our brains consume 20% of our body's energy, a massive metabolic cost, which suggests they provide an equally massive survival advantage. But what was that advantage? What environmental pressure demanded such a rapid, energy-intensive increase in cognitive function? And here's the even stranger part. There is a specific gene, a gene called FOXP2, often called the language gene, that exists in a form unique to humans. Chimpanzees have a version of it. Neanderthals had a version. But humans have a variant that appeared relatively recently and spread rapidly through the population. This gene is associated with the ability to produce complex speech. Without it, language as we know it doesn't function properly. And it appears suddenly in the human line, with no clear transitional mutations leading up to it. It's as if someone flipped a switch. Now, standard evolutionary biology has explanations for all of this: random mutation, sexual selection, environmental pressures we haven't fully identified yet. And those explanations might be correct, probably are correct. But consider what the Sumerian tablets say. They say humans were created from the clay of the earth, mixed with the blood of a god. In modern terms, that reads like terrestrial biology, combined with external genetic material. They say humans were given just enough intelligence to perform labor, but not enough to rebel. In modern terms, that reads like genetic engineering with specific limitations. And they say this creation happened relatively recently in the timeline of Earth's history, after the Anunnaki had already been here for a long time. Is it possible, even remotely, that what the Sumerians described as divine blood mixed with clay is what we would describe as genetic modification? That what they understood as gods fashioning humans from Earth is what we would understand as advanced beings altering the DNA of existing primates? The missing link in human evolution has been a mystery for over a century. Paleontologists have found fossils of various hominin species, but the transition from Homo erectus to Homo sapiens is still not fully understood. There are gaps, there are questions, there are leaps that don't have clear explanations. And while science continues to search for answers within the framework of natural evolution, The Sumerian tablets offer a different framework entirely. They say someone intervened. Think about what that would require. The ability to understand genetics, to isolate specific traits, to combine DNA from different sources, to create a viable fertile organism capable of surviving and reproducing. We can do this now, right now. In 2025, human beings have the technology to edit genes, to create genetically modified organisms, to alter the fundamental code of life. It's not science fiction, it's science fact. So if we can do this now, with our relatively primitive technology, is it so impossible to imagine that another species, one far older, far more advanced, could have done it in the distant past? The Sumerians didn't have microscopes. They didn't have laboratories. They didn't have any scientific framework for understanding genetics. But they described a process that sounds remarkably like genetic engineering. They described mixing the essence of two different beings to create a third. They described this creation as deliberate, as purposeful, as designed to produce specific results. And they said it was done by beings who came from the sky. There's a concept in biology called the phylogenetic tree, the branching pattern of evolutionary relationships. Humans sit on one branch, chimpanzees on another, gorillas on another, all descending from common ancestors, splitting at various points over millions of years. But the human branch has something unusual. It has a sharp upward curve, a rapid increase in brain size, in cognitive function, in cultural complexity, that doesn't match the gradual pace of the surrounding branches. It's almost as if something pushed us forward, accelerated our development, gave us capabilities that should have taken millions more years to evolve naturally. Scientists call this encephalization, the increase in brain size relative to body size. And in humans, it happened fast, faster than it should have. So we're left with a question that science hasn't fully answered. A question that makes both evolutionists and creationists uncomfortable, because it doesn't fit neatly into either framework. Why are humans so different? Not just a little different, not just smarter chimps. Fundamentally, drastically, impossibly different. We have language, abstract thought, mathematics, music, art, philosophy, technology. No other species on Earth has these things, not even close. And it all appeared, in evolutionary terms, in the blink of an eye. The Sumerians had an answer. They said we were made this way, deliberately, by beings with the knowledge and power to do so. Maybe they were wrong. Maybe it's all myth, all allegory, all primitive attempts to explain the world before science. But maybe, just maybe, they were writing down what they knew, what they had been told, would actually happen. Every ancient culture has gods. That's not surprising. Religion, mythology, the need to explain the world through supernatural forces, these are universal human traits. We create gods to make sense of lightning, of death, of the changing seasons, of our own existence. But here's what is surprising. The descriptions are remarkably consistent. Gods who descend from the sky. Gods who travel in vehicles that glow and roar. Gods who are physical, who walk among humans, who eat and bleed and reproduce. Gods who teach humanity knowledge that seems too advanced for the time. Gods who demand worship, but also seem dependent on humanity for something. The Sumerian Anunnaki descend from the heavens and establish cities. The Hebrew Elohim create humans and walk in the garden. The Greek Olympians descend from Mount Olympus, which is described not just as a mountain, but as a realm above. The Hindu devas travel in flying vehicles called vimanas, described in texts like the Mahabharata with technical precision. The Mesoamerican Quetzalcoatl arrives from the sky, promises to return, and is depicted in art as descending from above. Different names, different cultures, different continents, different time periods. Same story. Beings from above. Beings who shaped human civilization. Beings who eventually left, but promised to return. In the Hebrew Bible, there's a strange passage in Genesis 6. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. The Nephilim, the fallen ones, giants, hybrids, the offspring of divine beings and human women. This is not metaphor. This is not symbolic. This is a genealogy, a claim about interbreeding between two different species. And it appears in one of the most foundational texts of Western religion, the Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text not included in most biblical canons, goes further. It names the Watchers, angels sent to earth to observe humanity, who instead descend, take human wives, and teach humanity forbidden knowledge, weapons, cosmetics, astrology, the movements of the stars, the art of warfare. And for this, they are punished, cast down, imprisoned until the end of days. But before they are imprisoned, their offspring, the Nephilim, walk the earth, giants, beings of immense size and strength, corruptions of the natural order. The story is almost identical to the Sumerian accounts. The Anunnaki take human wives. The resulting offspring are described as mighty men, heroes of old. And eventually, the gods decide this mixing has gone too far. The flood is sent, in part, to wipe out these hybrids, to reset humanity, to restore the original design. In Greek mythology, the gods constantly interbreed with humans. Zeus fathers Hercules, Poseidon fathers Theseus. Divine blood mixed with mortal blood, producing demigods, heroes, beings with abilities beyond normal humans. But these aren't just stories about exceptional people. They're stories about genetic mixing, about introducing divine traits into the human line, about creating something new through combination. The same theme repeats across cultures. The gods mate with humans. The resulting children are different, stronger, smarter, more capable, but also often tragic. Caught between two worlds, neither fully divine nor fully human. It's worth asking, why is this such a universal motif? Why do so many ancient cultures describe the same scenario? If it's pure invention, why invent this? Why not simpler myths? Why not just say the gods are distant, unreachable, wholly other? Why insist across continents and millennia that the gods came down, walked among us, and left offspring? The descriptions of these gods are also strangely consistent. They are described as taller than humans, radiant, sometimes glowing, often with wings, not as biological appendages necessarily, but as symbols or devices that allowed flight. In Sumerian art, the Anunnaki are depicted with wings, with elaborate headdresses, with objects in their hands that scholars interpret as symbols of power, but which, if you look closely, resemble tools or devices. In the Hebrew tradition, Angels are described as terrifying. When they appear to humans, their first words are almost always "do not be afraid," which suggests they are inherently frightening. They are described as surrounded by light, by fire, by wheels within wheels, covered in eyes, in the case of the cherubim and seraphim. These are not comforting images. These are descriptions of beings who are alien, overwhelming, other. In Hindu texts, the gods travel in vimanas, flying palaces or chariots, described with remarkable technical detail. The Vaimanika Shastra, a 20th century text, claiming to be based on much older sources, describes the construction and operation of these vehicles, including materials, propulsion systems, even weapons. Scholars debate the authenticity of the Vaimanika Shastra, but the descriptions of vimanas appear in ancient epics like the Ramayana and Mahabharata, texts thousands of years old. They describe vehicles that fly through the air, that can become invisible, that can travel to other worlds. Again, why? Why would ancient cultures, without any knowledge of flight, without any technological framework for understanding aeronautics, describe flying vehicles in such detail, unless they saw them? In Ezekiel, in the Hebrew Bible, the prophet describes a vision of a flying craft with wheels within wheels, with fire and lightning, with beings moving within it. The description is so detailed, so specific, that some engineers and 3 rooms, so promising, have seen a single magic power of understanding. The ancient astronaut theory, popularized by Erich von Däniken and others, suggests that these descriptions are not metaphorical. That ancient peoples encountered advanced beings, interpreted them through the only framework they had, religion and mythology, and recorded what they saw as divine visitations. This theory is controversial, heavily criticized by mainstream archaeology and history, often dismissed as pseudoscience. But the criticism usually focuses on the lack of physical evidence, the tendency towards speculation, the cherry-picking of data to fit a predetermined conclusion. What the criticism doesn't address is the consistency of the descriptions themselves. The way cultures separated by oceans, by millennia, by entirely different linguistic and religious frameworks, describe the same things. Gods from the sky, gods with advanced knowledge, gods who create or modify humans, gods who demand worship but also seem to need humanity for something, gods who leave but promise to return. If these are all independent inventions, all coincidental parallels, all symbolic expressions of universal human psychology, then we are dealing with the most remarkable coincidence in the history of culture. Or they were all describing the same thing. Something they saw, something they experienced, something they couldn't fully understand, but tried desperately to record. The Sumerians called them Anunnaki. The Hebrews called them Elohim or Nephilim. The Greeks called them gods. The Hindus called them Devas. The Maya called them sky gods. Different names for the same visitors. And if that's true, if there's even a fragment of truth to this, then the implications are staggering. It means we've been visited before. It means advanced beings have been to Earth, have influenced human development, have left traces in our oldest stories. And it means they might not be gone, just waiting, somewhere above. There are structures on this planet that shouldn't exist, not because they're impossible, but because they're too precise, too massive, too perfectly aligned. built with techniques we can barely replicate today, by people who supposedly had copper tools and rope. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built around 4,500 years ago. Composed of approximately 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing between 2 and 80 tons. The largest blocks, granite blocks in the King's Chamber, weigh up to 80 tons and were transported from quarries over 500 miles away. The pyramid is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60ths of a degree. Its base is level to within 2.1 centimeters over a distance of 230 meters. The ratio of its height to the perimeter of its base approximates the relationship between the radius of a circle and its circumference, essentially encoding pi. These are not primitive accomplishments. These are engineering feats that require precise measurement, sophisticated mathematics, and construction techniques that remain, to this day, not fully explained. Mainstream archaeology says the pyramid was built by tens of thousands of workers over 20 years, using copper tools, wooden sledges, and ramps. And maybe that's true, but the numbers don't quite add up. If the pyramid contains 2.3 million blocks, and it took 20 years to build, that means the builders would have had to place one block every 4.5 minutes, 24 hours a day, for 20 years straight. That's not impossible, but it's improbable, especially when you consider the precision required. Each block fits so tightly against the next that you can't slide a razor blade between them. And the Great Pyramid is not alone. Göbekli Tepe, in modern Turkey, built around 11,000 years ago, before agriculture, before pottery, before metal tools. This site predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. It predates the pyramids by 7,000 years. It consists of massive T-shaped pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons, arranged in circles, carved with intricate images of animals. The level of organization required to build this site suggests a complex society with surplus labor, with specialized workers, with advanced planning. But according to standard history, humans at this time were hunter-gatherers. Small nomadic groups, no cities, no kingdoms, no centralized authority capable of coordinating such a project. Yet Göbekli Tepe exists. Pumapumku, in Bolivia, built by the Tiwanaku civilization around 1,500 years ago. The site contains stone blocks weighing up to 130 tons, cut with such precision that they fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. The angles are perfect, the surface is flat to within fractions of a millimeter. Some of the cuts are so intricate, with such sharp internal corners, that modern engineers struggle to understand how they were made without advanced machinery. Stone doesn't cut that way, with chisels and hammers. Stone fractures, it chips. It cracks along natural fault lines. But at Pumapumku, the stone has been shaped as if it were soft, molded, machined. Archaeologists suggest the Tiwanaku used harder stones to shape softer stones, a process called pecking and grinding. And that might be true for rough shaping, but the level of precision at Pumapumku goes beyond what pecking and grinding should achieve. So we're left with a mystery. Not just how they moved the stones, though that's a mystery in itself, but how they shaped them. The same question applies to the stones of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, where blocks weighing hundreds of tons are fitted together with no mortar, with joints so precise you can't slip a piece of paper between them. Or the megaliths of Baalbek in Lebanon, where the foundation stones, called the trilithon, weigh up to 800 tons each and sit 20 feet above ground level. 800 tons. Moved, lifted, placed with Bronze Age technology. The mainstream explanation is always the same. Lots of people, lots of time, lots of effort, and human ingenuity. Never underestimate what humans can accomplish with enough determination. And that's a fair point. Humans are ingenious. We solve problems, we innovate, we push beyond what seems possible. But there's a difference between difficult and impossible, between improbable and inexplicable. And some of these structures push into the realm of inexplicable. The ancient Egyptians left records, lots of records, hieroglyphs covering temple walls, tomb inscriptions, papyrus scrolls. They documented their lives in exhaustive detail. Battles, reigns, religious ceremonies, daily life. But nowhere in all the thousands of hieroglyphs covering Egyptian monuments is there a detailed description of how the pyramids were built. No blueprints, no step-by-step instructions, no records of the tools used, the techniques employed, the workforce organized. It's almost as if the knowledge was assumed, passed down, understood without needing to be written, or lost. There are legends across multiple cultures of a lost golden age, a time before the flood, before the catastrophe, when humanity possessed knowledge that was later forgotten. The Greeks spoke of Atlantis, an advanced civilization that sank beneath the waves. The Sumerians spoke of the Apkallu, 7 sages who appeared before the flood and taught humanity the foundations of civilization. The Apkallu are described as fishmen, beings who emerged from the sea, who brought writing, mathematics, law, agriculture. They are depicted in Mesopotamian art wearing fish-like garments, with scales, with the head of a fish draped over their heads like a hood. And they are described as coming before the flood, as teachers, as those who laid the foundation for everything that came after. After the flood, according to the myths, knowledge had to be recovered, rebuilt, relearned from fragments. What if the megaliths, the pyramids, the precisely cut stones, what if these are remnants of that earlier age, not built by primitive people with ropes and copper, but by a civilization that possessed knowledge we lost? And what if that knowledge came from the Anunnaki? The Sumerian king list, one of the oldest historical documents, describes rulers who reigned before the flood, and their reigns are impossibly long, tens of thousands of years. One king reigns for 43,200 years, another for 28,800. Scholars interpret this as mythological, symbolic, not meant to be taken literally. But what if the timescale is different? What if these weren't human kings? What if they were Anunnaki, beings who lived far longer than humans, who ruled over human civilizations for vast stretches of time? The tablets say that kingship was lowered from heaven, that the first cities were established by the gods. That writing, law, agriculture, all the foundations of civilization were gifts from above, not discoveries, gifts. And then, after the flood, humanity had to start over. But we started with remnants, with knowledge preserved by the survivors, with structures built before the catastrophe that we couldn't replicate, but could only marvel at. The pyramids align with Orion's belt. Göbekli Tepe aligns with the constellation of the Fox. Angkor Wat in Cambodia mirrors the constellation Draco. Why? Why would ancient people, who supposedly struggled just to survive, spend enormous effort aligning their monuments with the stars, unless the stars mattered, unless the stars were home, unless the builders were trying to mark something, to send a message, to say, we came from there? The Anunnaki are described as star travelers. Nibiru, their home, is described as a planet with a vast orbit, passing through the inner solar system only once every few thousand years. Some researchers suggest Nibiru could be a rogue planet, a brown dwarf, something that hasn't been detected by modern astronomy but could exist in the outer reaches of our solar system. There's a theory called Planet 9, a hypothetical planet proposed by astronomers to explain unusual orbital patterns in the Kuiper Belt. Something massive, something distant, something we haven't seen yet, but whose gravitational influence is detectable. Could that be Nibiru? It's speculation, highly speculative. But the Sumerians described a solar system with accuracy that shouldn't have been possible. They knew about Uranus and Neptune, planets not visible to the naked eye, not discovered by modern science until the 18th and 19th centuries. How did they know? Unless someone told them, unless someone showed them. The megaliths stand, the pyramids endure, the precisely cut stones fit together still, after thousands of years, unmarred by time, by weather, by the erosion that crumbles lesser structures. They are waiting. Silent monuments to a past we don't fully understand. And maybe, just it seems, not fully understand. And maybe, just maybe, they're markers, signs, clues left behind by those who built them, saying, we were here. There's a question that sits at the edge of all of this, a question that the ancient texts hint at but never fully answer. If the Anunnaki were here, if they shaped human civilization, if they walked among us and built monuments and created us for their purposes, where are they now? The tablets say they left, returned to the heavens, ascended back to their realm, leaving humanity to govern itself. But they also say something else. They say the Anunnaki will return. In Sumerian mythology, the gods don't just vanish, they withdraw. They step back. But they remain involved, watching, occasionally intervening, maintaining a presence even if less direct. And across cultures, the same theme repeats. The gods leave, but they promise to return. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god of the Aztecs, departs across the sea, but promises to come back. When Hernán Cortés arrives in 1519, the Aztecs initially believe he might be the returning god, because the timing aligns with prophecies. In Hindu cosmology, the gods exist in cycles, ages of creation and destruction. The Kali Yuga, the current age, is described as a time of decline, but it will end with the return of Kalki, the final avatar of Vishnu, who will restore order. In Christian eschatology, Christ ascends to heaven but promises to return. The second coming, the end of the age, the restoration of divine rule on earth. The same promise, the same waiting. Now, you can interpret all of this as religious symbolism. The human need for hope, for justice, for the belief that someone will eventually set things right. But the specificity is strange. The Anunnaki don't just promise to return someday, in some vague future. The tablets describe cycles. The return of Nibiru, astronomical alignments, specific time periods, and if Nibiru is real, if it's a planet with a long elliptical orbit, then its return is predictable. Some researchers place the last passage of Nibiru around 3,600 years ago. If the orbit is consistent, the next passage would be soon, very soon. This is where the theory enters uncomfortable territory, because if you start talking about the return of the Anunnaki, you start sounding like a prophet, a doomsayer, someone predicting the end times. And maybe that's all it is. pattern-seeking in noise. The human tendency to see significance in random events. But consider the timing. In the last century, humanity has advanced technologically at an unprecedented rate. We've gone from horse-drawn carriages to space travel, from letters to instant global communication, from primitive surgery to genetic engineering. We've split the atom, we've mapped the human genome, we've sent probes beyond the solar system, we've built machines that think. We're on the verge of becoming what the Anunnaki were described as. Beings capable of manipulating genetics, of traveling through space, of reshaping worlds, almost as if we're reaching a threshold, a point of readiness. And at the same time, UFO sightings have increased, not just fringe claims. Official government reports, military encounters, the Pentagon releasing footage of objects moving in ways that defy known physics. The US government, as of recent years, has acknowledged the existence of unidentified aerial phenomena. Objects that accelerate instantaneously, that change direction without inertia, that move underwater and through air with equal ease. These aren't weather balloons. These aren't optical illusions. Something is here, watching, waiting. The ancient texts describe the Anunnaki as returning during times of transition, times when humanity reaches a certain level of development, or times when we're on the brink of self-destruction. We're living in both. The prophecies, across cultures, described signs, wars, natural disasters, a time of great upheaval before the return. The 20th and 21st centuries have seen global wars, nuclear weapons, climate change, pandemics, upheaval on a scale never before experienced. If you were looking for signs, you'd find them. But here's the thing about prophecies. They're vague enough to apply to almost any time period. Humans have always experienced wars, disasters, social upheaval. Every generation thinks it's living in the end times. So maybe this is no different. Or maybe the Sumerians knew something. Maybe they were told when the Anunnaki would return. Maybe they encoded that knowledge in their astronomical charts, their king lists, their myths. And maybe we're approaching that time. There's a concept in the ancient astronaut theory called the cargo cult phenomenon. During World War II, Allied forces built air bases on remote Pacific islands. The indigenous people, who had never seen planes or modern technology, watched as metal birds descended from the sky, bringing unimaginable wealth, food, tools, medicine. When the war ended, the planes stopped coming. The bases were abandoned. But the islanders didn't forget. They built runways out of bamboo. They carved headphones out of wood. They created mock airports, performing rituals to call the planes back. They worshipped the technology they didn't understand. They turned the soldiers into gods. This is how mythology begins, not from imagination, from misunderstanding. What if the ancient Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Hebrews, the Maya, what if they were cargo cults? What if they witnessed advanced technology, interpreted it as divine, and built religions around the beings who wielded it? And what if those beings left, just like the Allied forces left the Pacific Islands, but promised to return? The rituals continue, the temples stand, the prayers rise, waiting for the gods to descend again. But maybe the gods are already here, watching from a distance, observing our progress, waiting for us to reach a certain level before they make themselves known. Or maybe they never left. Maybe they've been here all along, hidden, operating in the shadows, guiding human development in subtle ways. This is the idea behind some modern UFO theories, that extraterrestrial beings have maintained a presence on Earth for millennia. That abduction reports, encounters, sightings, these aren't new phenomena, but ongoing contact, interpreted differently across different time periods. In ancient times, people saw angels, demons, gods. In medieval times, they saw fairies, elves, spirits. In modern times, we see aliens. Same experience, different framework. The Anunnaki, if they exist, if they're returning, what would they find? They would find a species they created, a species designed to serve, now capable of incredible things, independent, powerful, dangerous. They would find a world transformed. Cities covering the landscape, weapons capable of destroying the planet, technology approaching their own. Would they be pleased, concerned, threatened? The tablets describe conflicts among the Anunnaki. Enlil and Enki, brothers, often at odds over how to handle humanity. Enlil favoring harsh control, Enki favoring compassion and independence. If they return, those conflicts might resume, and humanity, caught in the middle, might finally learn the truth of our origin, or we might be judged, evaluated, found wanting. The flood, in the ancient texts, was a judgment, a reset, an attempt to wipe the slate clean and start over. What if the return brings another judgment? The thought is unsettling. The idea that we are not the masters of our own fate, that we are, and have always been, under observation, under control. But it's also liberating, in a strange way. Because if the Anunnaki are real, if they created us, if they're returning, then we are not alone. We never have been. The universe is not empty. Intelligence exists beyond Earth, and we are part of a larger story, a cosmic narrative that stretches back thousands, maybe millions of years. We are not accidents. Not random assemblages of molecules that happened to gain consciousness. We are designed, created, part of a plan. Whether that plan is benevolent or otherwise remains to be seen. But the waiting is almost over. The cycles are turning. The orbits are aligning. The signs, for those who believe in them, are appearing. And somewhere in the cold dark between the stars, perhaps a planet is approaching, returning after millennia, carrying beings who remember us, who made us, who are coming home. Let's be honest, this is where skepticism is not just warranted, but necessary. Because everything we've explored, every tablet, every myth, every anomaly, can be explained without invoking ancient astronauts, without suggesting that humanity is the product of genetic engineering, without claiming that gods from the sky shaped our civilization. Historians and archaeologists have spent centuries studying these texts, these monuments, these cultures. And the consensus, the overwhelming consensus, is that the ancient astronaut theory is not supported by evidence. The Sumerian tablets, they argue, are mythology. Rich, complex mythology, but mythology nonetheless. The Anunnaki are gods in the traditional sense, personifications of natural forces, cosmic powers, human fears and aspirations projected onto the heavens. The creation myths are allegory. The mixing of divine blood with clay is a poetic way of expressing the idea that humans have both earthly and divine qualities, both physical bodies and spiritual essence. The flood narrative is likely based on real catastrophic flooding in Mesopotamia. The region is prone to severe floods. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers overflow. Cities are destroyed. Survivors remember. And those memories become stories, stories that grow with each retelling, until they become myths of world-ending delusions. The Great Pyramid was built by skilled workers, using techniques that, while impressive, are not impossible. Egyptologists have demonstrated that copper tools, combined with sand abrasers, can cut granite. That large blocks can be moved using sledges, rollers, and enough laborers. That ramps, either straight or spiral, could have provided access to higher levels. The precision of the pyramid's alignment is remarkable, but not inexplicable. Ancient Egyptians were skilled astronomers. They could track the stars, measure angles, level ground using water trenches. The encoding of pi might be coincidental, or it might be a byproduct of using specific ratios in construction, not necessarily evidence of advanced mathematical knowledge. Göbekli Tepe challenges traditional timelines, yes, but it doesn't require extraterrestrial intervention to explain. It suggests that hunter-gatherer societies were more organized, more capable of monumental construction than previously thought. That religion, ritual, and communal identity might have driven the creation of agriculture and settled life, rather than the other way around. The megalithic structures can be explained by human ingenuity, time, and effort. Moving massive stones is difficult, but not impossible. Experiments have shown that relatively small groups of people, using ropes, levers, and ingenuity, can move stones weighing many tons. As for the genetic leap in human evolution, science has explanations. Random mutations in key genes, like FOXP2, can have large effects. Sexual selection, where mates are chosen based on intelligence, linguistic ability, or social skills, can rapidly drive the evolution of those traits. Environmental pressures, like climate change, can create bottlenecks that accelerate evolutionary change. The missing link isn't missing. It's just not fully documented. Fossils are rare. The conditions required for fossilization are specific. The fact that we haven't found every transitional form doesn't mean they didn't exist. And the similarities across mythologies, cultural diffusion, human universals, the fact that all humans share certain psychological needs, certain storytelling patterns, certain ways of making sense of the world. Joseph Campbell's monomyth, The Hero's Journey, appears across cultures not because they're describing the same real events, but because humans everywhere face similar existential questions and create similar narrative structures to answer them. The UFO sightings, misidentifications, optical illusions, experimental aircraft, psychological phenomena. The human brain is wired to find patterns, to see agency, to interpret ambiguous stimuli as meaningful. We see faces in clouds. We see figures in shadows. We see spacecraft in weather balloons. The government acknowledgement of UAPs doesn't mean extraterrestrial visitation. It means there are objects in the sky that military personnel can't immediately identify. That doesn't make them alien. It makes them unidentified. Most are probably drones, foreign surveillance aircraft, atmospheric phenomena. This is the rational perspective, the evidence-based perspective. The perspective that doesn't require leaps into the unknown, into the speculative, into the realm of extraordinary claims that require extraordinary evidence. And it's a strong perspective, compelling, probably correct. But there's always a but. The tablets are remarkably detailed, too detailed for simple allegory. The processes described in the creation myths have procedural specificity. Ingredients are listed, steps are followed, results are achieved. The flood myths are consistent across cultures that had no contact. The Native American Hopi describe a great flood. The Australian Abrahimirals describe a flood. The Chinese, the Norse, the Polynesians. Global flood myths appear in over 200 cultures worldwide. Could they all be remembering local floods, inflated into global catastrophes? Possibly. But the consistency of the details, the ark, the animals, the survivors, the landing on a mountain, it's eerie. The megalithic structures are not just difficult to build. Some are difficult to explain even with modern technology. The precision at Pumapunku, the weight of the stones at Baalbek, the alignment of the pyramids, these are not easily dismissed. And the genetic leap is not fully explained. Yes, mutations happen. Yes, selection pressures exist. But the speed of the change, the magnitude of the cognitive difference between Homo sapiens and our closest relatives, it's unprecedented in the evolutionary record. As for the UFO phenomena, the military encounters, the government reports, these are not easily dismissed as misidentifications when trained pilots, using advanced sensor equipment, track objects performing maneuvers that no known human technology can replicate. So we're left in a space of uncertainty, a space where the mainstream explanations are probably right, but not definitively so. Where the ancient astronaut theory is probably wrong, but not impossibly so. And that space, that uncertainty, is where the fascination lives. Because what if? What if the Sumerians were not writing mythology, but history? What if the gods were not metaphors, but memories? What if humanity is not the product of blind evolutionary chance, but deliberate design? What if we are not alone, have never been alone, and are being watched even now by beings who remember when they made us? These are questions without answers. Questions that science cannot yet resolve, that history cannot yet explain, that archaeology cannot yet uncover. But they are questions worth asking, because the search for truth is not about finding comfortable answers. It's about following the evidence wherever it leads, even if it leads to places that challenge everything we thought we knew. The tablets exist, the monuments stand, the myths persist. And somewhere, in the gap between what we know and what we believe, the truth waits. So here we are, at the end of a long exploration, a journey through ancient texts, through genetic mysteries, through megalithic monuments and modern UFO sightings, through myth and history and the blurred space between them. We've looked at the Anunnaki, beings described in the oldest written texts of human civilization. We've examined the creation narratives, the flood stories, the detailed accounts of gods descending from the sky, creating humans, shaping civilization, and eventually leaving with a promise to return. We've considered the genetic anomaly of human intelligence, the sudden leap in cognitive ability that defies the gradual pace of evolution. We stood before the pyramids, the megaliths, the impossibly precise stone cuts that challenge our understanding of ancient technology. We've traced the common threads across cultures, the consistent descriptions of sky gods, of divine beings who mate with humans, who teach forbidden knowledge, who ascend back to the heavens. We've entertained the possibility of return, of cycles, of beings watching and waiting for the right moment to make themselves known again. And we've acknowledged the skeptics, the rational voices that urge caution, that offer natural explanations, that remind us not to leap to extraordinary conclusions without extraordinary evidence. So what are we left with? Not certainty, not proof, not a definitive answer to the question of human origin, but we're left with something else. We're left with wonder. Wonder at the depth of ancient knowledge. Wonder at the complexity of myths that span continents and millennia. Wonder at the possibility, however remote, that we might be part of a larger cosmic story. And we're left with humility. Humility in the face of how much we don't know, how much of the past is lost, fragmented, open to interpretation. How much of our own existence remains mysterious, despite all our scientific advancement. We like to think we have it figured out, that we understand where we came from, how we got here, what our place in the universe is, but the truth is, we don't. We have theories, we have models, we have narratives that make sense given the evidence we have, but the evidence is incomplete. The picture is partial. And in the gaps, in the spaces where our knowledge fades into uncertainty, that's where the Anunnaki live. Not as proven fact, but as possibility. As a reminder that history is deeper than we know, that our origins might be stranger than we imagine, that the universe might be more populated, more interconnected, more intentional than we dare believe. The Sumerian tablets are not going away. They sit in museums, catalogued and translated, waiting for anyone willing to read them without preconception. They say what they say, and what they say is that beings from the heavens came to Earth, created humans, shaped civilization, and left. You can believe that. You can dismiss it. You can hold it in tension, neither fully accepting nor fully rejecting. But you can't unhear it. Once you've read those tablets, once you've seen the detail, the consistency, the clarity of the claims, something changes. You start looking at ancient history differently. You start wondering about the gaps, the leaps, the inexplicable advancements. You start asking, what if? And that question, that simple two-word question, is powerful. It opens doors, it challenges assumptions, it invites exploration. What if humanity is not the accident we thought we were? What if our DNA carries traces of deliberate intervention? What if the gods of ancient myth were something more than imagination? What if the sky holds not just stars, but watchers? What if we were created for a purpose we've long forgotten? What if that purpose is about to be revealed? These are not questions with easy answers. They might not have answers at all, but asking them, sitting with them, allowing them to unsettle our comfortable narratives, that's where growth happens. That's where understanding deepens. The universe is vast, unimaginably vast. Billions of galaxies, each containing billions of stars, many of those stars with planets, some of those planets potentially harboring life. The odds that we are alone, that Earth is the only place where intelligence emerged, where consciousness developed, where beings capable of thought and creation and meaning arose, those odds are vanishingly small. Somewhere out there, something else is alive. Something else is thinking. Something else is looking at the stars and wondering if they're alone. And maybe, just maybe, some of those beings are not wondering. Maybe they know. Because they've been here, they've visited, they've left traces. The Anunnaki, or whatever name you want to give them. The ancient texts are their calling card. The megalithic structures are their monuments. The myths are their legacy. And we, humanity, walking this small blue planet, building our cities, crafting our technologies, reaching toward the stars, we might be their greatest creation, or their grandest experiment, or their unfinished work. The truth is out there, in the words of a famous phrase, but it's also in here, encoded in our DNA, buried in our collective memory, whispered in the myths we've carried for thousands of years. We are a species haunted, infested by the sky, in facet work infested, obsessed with the stars, drawn to the mystery of what lies beyond. And maybe that's not random. Maybe that's intentional. Maybe we were designed to look up, to seek, to question, to wonder. Maybe the Anunnaki gave us that, the gift of curiosity, the curse of restlessness. So we keep searching, keep building, keep reaching. And somewhere in the cold dark between the worlds, maybe they're watching, proud, concerned, waiting for the day when we're ready, for the day when the children they created finally understand who they are and who made them. Pause for a moment, look up. The stars are still there, the same stars the Sumerians watched, the same stars they charted, the same stars they believed held the home of the gods. Thousands of years have passed, civilizations have risen and fallen. Languages have been born and died. Technology has advanced beyond anything the ancients could have imagined. But the stars remain, and the questions remain. Where do we come from? Why are we here? Are we alone? The Anunnaki don't answer these questions definitively. They offer one possibility among many, a narrative that feels both ancient and disturbingly modern, a story that combines myth and science, history and speculation, belief and doubt. But maybe that's appropriate. Maybe the truth of human origin is not simple, not clean, not easily categorized. Maybe it's messy, complex, layered with meanings we can't fully grasp. Maybe the Sumerians were writing mythology, or maybe they were writing memory. Maybe the Anunnaki were gods, or maybe they were visitors. Maybe we are the product of evolution, or maybe we are the product of design. Maybe the universe is empty, or maybe it's watching. We don't know, and that's okay, because the not knowing is what drives us forward. The mystery is what keeps us searching, and in the searching, in the questioning, in the wondering, we become more than we were. We become beings who refuse to accept easy answers, who push beyond the boundaries of the known, who look at ancient tablets and see not just mythology, but possibility. The Anunnaki, real or imagined, physical or metaphorical, have given us a gift. They've given us a story that makes us question everything. And in questioning everything, we might just find the truth, or at least get a little closer. The tablets are waiting, the monuments are standing, the stars are shining. And the story, the oldest story, the forbidden story, the story of where we really came from, is still being written by us, the created, the children of the Anunnaki, or the children of Earth, or perhaps both. The answer is out there, in the ruins, in the genes, in the spaces between the stars, and someday, maybe soon, we'll know. Until then, we wonder, we search, we remember, and we wait for the gods to return, or for the day when we realize we never needed them to. We pay all rights. We show up and see human beings.